If you would, we're going to start out this evening in 1 Peter chapter 5. 1 Peter chapter 5, there in verse 8. Should be a very familiar passage to many of us. I've used this passage in many of lessons. I've preached lessons out of this passage, and I will again this evening. But maybe from a little bit of a different angle than you've thought about it before, or maybe you have thought about it before, and this will be a good reminder. What happens when we fail to keep watch? 1 Peter 5 and verse 8 says, "Be sober-minded, be vigilant, or be watchful. Your adversary the devil prowls around like a roaring lion, seeking whom he may devour." If you're to picture a watchman patrolling the walls of a castle, how do they keep watch? Do they stand in one spot the entire night, looking at one spot in the bushes? Well, I kept an eye on that bush all night long. I didn't see a lion. But the lion still attacked elsewhere. Did they do their duty? Did they keep watch? The idea of being watchful, the idea of being vigilant, I like the way the New King James puts that, is that you're aware of all your surroundings. You're keeping watch of everything around you. My father used to get on to us a lot as we grew up. Well, I was watching out. I was being careful. Yeah, but you still bumped into that lady at the store. You evidently weren't being careful enough. You weren't being watchful enough. You weren't paying attention. You were not aware of your surroundings. Just because they weren't directly in front of you in your eyesight that you saw there did not mean that you were being careful. The same thing is true spiritually. And I think there's a lot of examples that we could go to for this. I ask you to turn back with me to the book of Ezra this evening. Ezra there in the Old Testament, I think, is a fantastic example of a people who served God, who loved God, who wanted to see good things done, but they failed to keep the watch. They became hyper-focused on one duty that other areas of their spiritual walk began to fall by the wayside and led to many problems. That's the exact problem we see beginning in Ezra chapter 1. Ezra sets up the chapter and the really intention of the book of Ezra beginning there in verse 2. "Thus says Cyrus, king of Persia, all the kingdoms of the earth and the Lord God of heaven he has given to me. He has commanded me to build him a house at Jerusalem, which is in Judah. Who is among you of all people? May his God be with him. Let him go up to Jerusalem, which is in Judah, and build a house of the Lord God of Israel. He is God, which is in Jerusalem. And whoever is left in any place where he dwells, let the men of this place help him with silver and gold, with goods and livestock, besides the freewill offerings for the house of God, which is in Jerusalem." By Cyrus, king of Persia, the Israelites have finally been sent back home, as Isaiah and others prophesied. We're going back, and one of the very first things that we are told to do is to rebuild the house of the Lord. And for many aspects, that is the point of the book of Ezra, detailing the people going back, their trials, tribulations, and their successes in rebuilding the house of the Lord. And as you read through the book of Ezra, we'll just kind of skim through this, they do many good things. They go there with a goal, and they accomplish this goal. In chapter 3, they've rebuilt the altar. In chapter 3 as well, they begin keeping the Feast of Booths for the first time since before they had been taken away into captivity. Verse 5 details that they begin to worship regularly. They begin to restore a relationship with their God. Chapter 3 and verse 10 also shows us how they lay the foundation of the temple. They're off to an amazing start. They're doing many good things in service to the Lord. They have been sent back with a purpose. Rebuild God's temple, and they get off to a great start. Now, by the end of chapter 3, they run into some complications. We'll briefly hit on that later, where some people of the area begin to harass Cyrus. Cyrus puts a pause to the building of the temple, and so for a number of years, the work stops and then restarts by the time we get to chapter 6. In chapter 6, the temple is finally rebuilt. They're given the go-ahead yet again. Okay, the enemies are taken care of, or we will take care of them, or you don't need to worry about it anymore. Get back to rebuilding the temple. They do so diligently, chapter 6 and verse 16 and 17 tell us. They go a step further. They reestablish the priesthood. Finally, we're being able to get back to worship the way that God intended. Even if they had all of the law while they were in captivity, there was no temple for them to go to. There was no priesthood that was established. There was no way that they could fully keep the old law while they were in captivity. And in fact, much of it had been forgotten. Finally, we're beginning to do things right. But then chapter 9 hits. We've looked at chapter 9 before in a lesson. Look at it from a little bit of a different aspect this evening. When these things were done, the leaders came to me, that is Ezra, saying, the people of Israel and the priests and the Levites have not separated themselves from the peoples of the lands with respect to the abominations of the Canaanites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Jebusites, the Ammonites, the Moabites, the Egyptians, and the Amorites. For they have taken some of their daughters as wives for themselves and their sons, so that the holy seed is mixed with the people of those lands. Indeed, the hand of the leaders and rulers have been foremost in this trespass. So when I heard this thing, I tore my garment and my robe. I plucked out some of the hair of my head and my beard, and I sat down astonished. While good work was being done, while the temple was being rebuilt, while the people's hearts were rejoicing. Yes, there was some sadness for those that were alive to see the original temple. And this new temple was nothing like Solomon's temple. But there is still joy that the law has been found. We're restoring a relationship with God. There is pride back in Israel as we keep reading the law. We're failing. We're not doing as God has commanded. We have fallen short. We've become so focused on fulfilling one part of the law, we have neglected others. We have failed to be watchful. We have failed to keep the whole law. And brethren, this is a problem that happens to, I would say, pretty much all Christians. Sometimes we fall into that very same trap. We get focused on evangelism like we do this year. And that's a good thing to focus on and to work on. But if we neglect other parts of God's law, then we fail. If we focus on authority in the church, and it's a good thing to focus on, it's a good thing to remind ourselves on. But then the home falls into neglect, and we're not being good husbands and wives and children and training up our families and encouraging them in the way they should go. Church may be worshiping as God intended, but if the family is in disarray, we failed to keep the watch. If the home is well, if church is well, but we fail to evangelize, we fail to sow the seed, then we fail. All aspects of God's words need to be kept. And that's the realization that Ezra and the people are coming to in Ezra chapter 9. And in many ways, I think that's part of what Peter is talking about in 1 Peter chapter 5. Be sober, be vigilant. Your adversary, the devil, is crafty. One of the ways in which he is crafty is he will help make you feel like you are serving God while attacking you on a different front. Sometimes we fail to keep the watch because we are basically putting on blinders. We're not describing a lazy guard here. We're describing someone who does try to keep the watch, who does try to serve their God. There's no question this is what Israel was in the book of Ezra. We're not talking about the Israelites in the days of Moses, that it seemed like in every turn they're trying to turn their back on God. They don't want to serve God. They don't want to follow God. This is too hard. This is a people that did desire to see God's word fulfilled. They wanted to rebuild the temple. They wanted to serve God faithfully. Ezra chapter 6 and verse 13 recounts, Then Tattenai, governor of the region beyond the river, Shethar-Boznai and their companions diligently did according to what King Darius had said. We're going to send out letters. We're going to tell people to complete the work. We're going to make sure and supervise that this work is done. Other prophets have had to be sent to warn us when we did fall short in the work and the temple was left in ruin. That's Book of Haggai. That's other things that we could talk about. But there, at this time, in Ezra chapter 6, they are diligently doing the work while neglecting other parts of God's law. When these things pop up, I think the common question is, how did we miss this? How did this sin go unnoticed? How is worship growing and doing well, but our home is in disarray? How did our own brethren miss the chaos that was at home and didn't notice? This has happened to elders, this has happened to preachers, this has happened to faithful, strong brethren whose homes are in disarray, just like in the book of Ezra. How were they seemingly so faithful and so strong when I talk to them out in the world and then I go to worship where they worship and the church is in disarray? There's no respect for authority. They're not doing as God commanded. What happened here? It happened as it always does. Satan's going to attack where we're weak. Satan's going to attack where we're distracted. Satan is going to use even our zeal, even our work, even our diligence, and attack our blind side. Ezra chapter 9, picking up in verse 4, reads this way. Then everyone who trembled at the words of God of Israel assembled to me, because of the transgression of those who had been carried away captive, and I sat astonished until the evening sacrifice. At the evening sacrifice I arose from my fasting. Having torn my garment and my robe, I fell on my knees. I spread out my hands to the Lord my God, and I said, O my God, I am too ashamed and humiliated to lift up my face to you, my God. For our iniquities have risen higher than our heads. Our guilt has grown up to the heavens. Since the days of our fathers to this day, we have been very guilty. And for our iniquities, we, our kings and our priests, have been delivered into the hands of the kings of the land, to the sword, to captivity, to plunder, to humiliation, as it is to this day. Something I admire about Ezra that doesn't always happen in the scriptures. In the case of Ezra, all the people acknowledge we've sinned. When they read God's word, as we talked about this morning, this is the inspired word of God. This is what God has said. If God calls this sin, then it is sin and we have sinned. They're not making excuses. They're not trying to cover it up. These are people that are diligent. They want to serve God. But they let themselves be blinded. They failed to fully keep the watch, to pay attention to everything that was happening around them. When they did that, Satan snuck in. There were a lot of hardships with building the temple. There were good days, there were bad days. Read books like Haggai, where they're failing to build the temple, where it's a struggle to even get people to pick up the tools and get to work. Satan attacked there, but here's a big problem. Satan doesn't just attack one aspect of our life. He doesn't just tempt us in a single area and leave us alone. He attacks on multiple fronts. He comes at us with multiple temptations, and if we feel like we're doing everything that we can, if we're expending all of our energy to deal with this problem over here, guess what's sneaking up back here? A different problem, a different temptation. When we're doing all that we can to, help a public work like the church or build the temple, but we don't pay attention to what's going on at home, is there any wonder how the home falls into disarray? If we're expending all of our energy at home, but then we're not being watchful of how we speak and act and talk at work, Is there any wonder the reputation of maybe the church begins to get hurt? Because I'm not watching my language and my attitude. I'm too busy dealing with my kids and my spouse at home, and I'm not watching myself when I'm out in public. Satan's crafty that way. Each person is tempted when he is lured and enticed by his own desire. Then desire, when it is conceived, gives birth to sin, and sin, when it is fully grown, gives forth death. If we're not watchful, if we're not careful, if we're not vigilant, sin can go unnoticed. It's exactly what we see in the book of Ezra in many ways. Back in Ezra chapter 4, again, I mentioned this isn't the only problem that they ran into. Ezra chapter 4, things are going well. They've laid the foundation. We've begun to keep the Feast of the Booths. We've set up the altar. We're beginning to be able to worship and serve our God. But by Ezra chapter 4, beginning in verse 23, when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letters was read before Rehum and Shimshai the scribe, their companions, they went up in haste to Jerusalem against the Jews, and by force of arms made them to cease the work. Thus the work of the house of God, which is at Jerusalem, ceased, and it was discontinued until the 2nd year of the reign of Darius, king of Persia. You know why it stopped? Multiple other nations that were occupying what was previously Jewish territory began to write to Darius, began to write to Artaxerxes and say, hey, if these Jews come back to Jerusalem, if they build this temple, if they begin serving this God that they claim to be the one true and only God, we will stop paying you taxes. And then the king, who previously was your help, was telling you to go back, was telling you he will supply you with what you need to rebuild the temple, now sends armed men to stop you. Boy, it feels like Satan's working hard today. Satan's doing everything in his power to stop God from keeping those promises that he made to men like Isaiah. The temple was getting started. We were zealous. We were excited to serve him. We got such a great start. Then you get discouraged because our men come in, told to resume the work, and then people are hesitant to resume the work. So we finally build people up. We get them to start doing the work again. They do complete the temple, and then they kind of stop and say, all right, we've done it all. That's it. It's what diligently putting on blinders looks like. I think we've lived through some of that with COVID. Felt like we were gaining some traction in some areas of our faith, and then a pandemic hits and we're told to stay home. Pandemic comes to an end, we're told to get out, and it feels like it's struggling to get people to come and spend time with brethren and to come to worship and to grow in faith again. Okay, we get people to start coming in, we get people to start being encouraged and start coming to worship, and then we start addressing problems, and people start not to like that. Their faith can grow weak. They can be fragile. They can feel like, well, it's easier when I was at home. When I didn't have people pointing out where I've fallen short, where there's flaws, where there's sin in my life that I need to correct. I've done some good. I've served God. I've gone to church. I've done what I need to do. That should be enough. Again, I propose to you that's what diligently putting on blinders looks like. That's what failing to keep the watch looks like. I hope all of you are familiar with Hebrews 10 and verse 25. Not neglecting to meet together as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another, and all the more as you see the day drawing near. Some attend services faithfully. They are here every time they can be. They are here every time the doors are open. That's a good thing. Don't misunderstand me. But their watch stops there. I've done the bare minimum. I've hyper-focused on that bush as I'm keeping watch, as I talked about at the beginning of the lesson. I focus on a couple things that I do every week in service to my God, and the rest lies neglected, gathering dust, and ignored. Is that vigilance? Is that keeping watch? Just doing part of God's command and leaving the rest by the wayside? We know the answer to that. It's no. We can see the example of that in the book of Ezra. They were doing good work, but other sin crept in. Other problems arose. We can see this in the book of Revelation. We read this account in Revelation chapter 2, verses 2 through 5 there on Wednesday night. Here are faithful brethren at one time here at Laodicea. They talk about the fact that we once served God. We were one, Ephesus was the example I wanted to use, not Laodicea. We're talking about the church there at Ephesus in Revelation chapter 2, beginning in verse 2, where Jesus writes, I know your works, your labor, your patience, that you cannot bear with those who are evil. You have tested those who say they are apostles and are not, and you have found them to be liars. You have persevered and have patience. You have labored for my name's sake, and you have not become weary. You have been diligent in doing many good things in service to my kingdom. But, verse 5 continues, remember therefore from where you have fallen. Repent and do the first works, or else I will come to you quickly and remove your lampstand from its place unless you repent. You've left your first love. You're not keeping the entirety of God's word. You've stood for the truth. Maybe you're still actively standing for the truth. You're combating false teachers and those who claim to be apostles coming into your midst. Yes, even verse 6 continues, you hate the deeds of the Nicolaitans, which I also hate. But you've become so hyper-focused over here with fulfilling one part of God's law and making sure you do this faithfully that the rest has fallen into neglect. You failed to remain vigilant. You failed to keep watch. And the words there should be chilling to us if we fall into this trap. Repent there from where you have fallen quickly, or else I will come and remove your lampstand. God's made it clear what this looks like. You don't diligently keep the watch as I've commanded you to. You don't do all things that my word tells you to. Even if diligently, even if not out of animosity or hatred of God's word, that you're purposefully leaving things aside. You can be diligent and zealous in one area, but be lacking and empty in another. If that is the case, here's our reminder. Step up. Strengthen the weak hands and knees. Shape up where we're lacking. Put the work in. Don't leave it there, or else we'll really run into problems. Some put on blinders like this. They teach the truth to others, but for themselves, they come up lacking. I could use a number of examples about this. I could talk about pretty much any passage that talks about the Pharisees and Sadducees and the lawyers throughout Jesus' times. I like Galatians 2 and verse 11. Because here is someone that there is no doubt in our mind diligently loved God, served his God, taught the truth. Here we see the example of Paul and Peter. When Peter had come to Antioch, Paul writes, I withstood him to his face because he was to be blamed. For before certain men came from James, he would eat with the Gentiles, but when they came, he withdrew and separated himself, fearing those who were of the circumcision party. And the rest of the Jews also played the hypocrite with him, so that even Barnabas was carried away with their hypocrisy. But when I saw that they were not straightforward about the truth of the gospel, I said to Peter before them all, if you, being a Jew, live in the manner of Gentiles and not as the Jews, why do you compel Gentiles to live as Jews? The whole reason Peter even came to Antioch was to teach the truth. This wasn't a random everyday occurrence and Paul walked into a Denny's and saw Peter sitting with Jews and leaving the Gentiles. They had come for the purpose of holding a meeting, of studying God's Word, of getting down to the brass tacks of what does God teach and how are we to live and believe when it comes to this divisive subject of circumcision. They are there diligently for the purpose of studying, examining, and answering these scriptural questions. And while getting so focused on that, I'm sure Peter, like many speakers, thinking a lot about how he's going to answer, how he's going to address these questions, how we're going to try and convince folks what the truth is, put on blinders. Got too focused on the subject set before him and didn't watch himself. He didn't look in the mirror. He didn't realize what actions he was taking here. This wasn't out of malice. This wasn't because Peter secretly hated all Gentiles and loved the Jews more or thought they deserved some greater place in the kingdom. We know that's not true. But he failed to keep the watch. He failed to be vigilant, to be aware of the things that he did, how it might affect others, of the things that he said, how it might hurt the cause of Christ. Brethren, we can fall into that very same trap. It doesn't have to be we're teaching false doctrine. It doesn't have to be evil, hateful, malicious things that we say to those around us. It can be carelessness that causes Satan to walk through the door and devour. It can be a lack of awareness that I'm not being careful of my actions, and this has hurt the cause of Christ. This has caused others to walk away and not be interested in the gospel because I've played the hypocrite without realizing. This has caused others to not walk through the door of a church ever again because of something I did or I said. I've known brethren with the best of intentions have said things to visitors and those that were checking out a congregation. I've known elders and elders' wives to say things to visiting people, and they were careless. Those visitors said, I will never be back because of the things that were said and done. I'm not talking about whether they're in the right for that attitude. I'm saying the faithful were not watchful of themselves. We'll all give an account of what we say and what we do when we stand before God. Part of being vigilant is to be watchful of myself as well as others. Some have a very zealous attitude, but they put blinders on when it comes to the truth. Those that worship him must worship him in spirit and in truth. Some people are very zealous. They're very excited. They want to serve God, but they're a leap first and ask if this is right later. They jump into something because, yeah, to me that sounds good, but I didn't confirm it with whether I have the authority, whether I have the examples in God's Word to do such a thing. Even about some of our own brethren, Paul talked about them in Romans chapter 10 this way. For I bear them witness that they have a zeal for God, but not according to knowledge. For being ignorant of the righteousness of God and seeking to establish their own, they did not submit to God's righteousness. We could turn to a lot of examples that show just that, both in the Old and the New Testament. I'm sure all of us could probably give an example of someone we know, or maybe a time in our life, when we did that exact same thing, where zeal gets ahead of knowledge and leads to problems. When that happens, we failed to keep watch. We got too excited. We began focusing on maybe something that does need to be focused on, but to the detriment of keeping an eye on everything else. If that is the case, let this be our reminder. Let us faithfully, diligently keep the watch. Colossians 3 and verse 17, whatever you do, in word or deed, do everything in the name of the Lord Jesus, giving thanks to God the Father through him. He did not say, whatever you do, singular thing, don't worry about anything else, make sure that one thing is faithful. No, everything you do. Be cautious. Be aware. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves, as we talked about this morning in Bible class. Be aware what we're doing, what we're saying, what we're not doing and saying. How we worship. How we hold ourselves in public and in private. How we encourage or chastise our family and friends and brethren. Let it all be done in the way in which God has told us to. We need to broaden, not shorten, the scope of what we think on. I like Philippians chapter 4 for this example. Finally, brethren, Paul writes, whatever is true, whatever is honorable, whatever is just, whatever is pure, whatever is lovely, whatever is commendable, if there is any excellence, if there is anything worthy of praise, think on these things. Things, plural. He did not say, just hyper-focus on whatever is true at the expense of not talking about honor. He did not say, focus on what is true and what is honorable at the expense of talking about what is just. He did not even say, focus on what is true, what is honorable, what is just, and what is pure, but not talk about what is lovely and what is commendable. On all these things, think on them. Meditate on them. Put them to use. Sometimes we can focus on just 2 or 3 things and still fall short. Not giving this lesson in the case that we get now so anxious that we're afraid that we're going to misstep and fall out of grace. I'm saying these things to help us be more aware of our surroundings. Be watchful of what we do. Be watchful of how we speak. Let me speak as an oracle of God, 1 Peter 4 and verse 11. Let me speak as he speaks and as he commands me to speak. Of everything else, be a little bit more cautious. Be wise as serpents and harmless as doves. Don't speak as a supposed follower of God, as someone who honors God with their lips, but our heart is far from him, Matthew 15 and verse 8. Do not fall into the trappings of Matthew 23 and verse 23. Woe to you, scribes, Pharisees, and hypocrites! For you pay tithe of mint, of anise, and cumin, and have neglected the weightier matters of the law, justice, mercy, and faith. These you ought to have done, without neglecting the other. There's a really easy lesson in there. Even in the small aspects, even the things that we think are less important. Jesus did not say, yeah, don't worry about those things. There's more important things to deal with in God's Word. He said, these you should have done in the first place, while not neglecting the others. Because here's something that sometimes we get overwhelmed and don't fully realize. We can do it all. We can fully serve and follow God as he has commanded and he has written. This is not an impossible task. This is not something that he has given us that we cannot accomplish. God never asks us to keep one commandment to the neglect of others. Turn back with me just a page or two to Matthew 22, beginning there in verse 37. Matthew 22 and verse 37, Jesus said to him, you shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, and with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment, and the second is like it. You shall love the neighbor as yourself. On these 2 commandments hang all the law and prophets. And again there, That term, on these two things hang all the law and prophets, that is not Jesus saying, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor as yourself, and don't worry about the rest. He's saying this is the foundation of the rest, which you are also supposed to listen to and supposed to follow. Get that foundation right, the rest will come easier, is what he's saying there. But if that foundation is crumbling, you're going to struggle to keep the rest of it, because on these two things hang everything. If I can't love my neighbor, if I can't follow God, then I'm going to struggle to keep God's word. But you still have to keep all of it. You still have to listen to all of it. You still have to do the best so that our lights can shine in everything that God's word speaks to. In the same way, let your light shine before others so that others may see your good works. Plural. Not one good work. Not one good deed. Not one single thing that I have done in service to God and my taxes paid. In all things, whatever time God has given me, whatever doors he opens, whatever I can do and you can do to serve him, let us do it. Let us keep the good watch. If his divine power has granted to us all things that pertain to life and godliness, let us follow all things. Let us be sober-minded. Let us be vigilant. Let us be watchful. We talked recently in the adult Bible class about the armor of God. It's another way of saying he has equipped us with all things that we need to keep watch. He has equipped us with all things that we need in order to serve him faithfully. This is not an impossible task. There's no promise that it'll be easy. It does require work. Keeping watch, I've not done it as far as a person that's in charge of insurance or a person that's in charge of keeping watch on a building or anything that's supposed to be under guard, but I do have friends that have. It's mentally taxing. There's a lot to it. You'll run into all kind of people. But it's something that still has to be done. Satan is constantly on the prowl. But we still have to keep watch. Or else our souls, or the souls of those that we love, might be in jeopardy. Helps me to think of it like that. If the ones that I love most are in danger because I don't do my due diligence, I know I'm going to feel awful for that. So I have to do my best. And if each and every one of us have that same attitude, we can keep watch. If each and every one of us have that attitude, Satan cannot touch us. Because we're all working together. We're all standing firm. We're all serving our God. It just takes one or two people, though, to fail to keep watch, and he slips into a church. It takes one or two people to fail to keep watch in the home, and he enters in because we weren't fully aware of what was going on. It takes a few moments of lapse in judgment to not pay attention to what I'm doing and what I am saying for the cause of Christ to be hurt by my actions. So let us keep watch. And the thing I want to leave us on this evening is if we fail to keep watch, remember the last couple verses that we'll read out of Ezra chapter 9. Turn back with me there one more time and the lesson is yours. Ezra 9, beginning in verse 7. Since the days of our fathers to this day we have been very guilty, and for our iniquities our kings and our priests have been delivered into the hands of the kings of the lands, to the sword, to captivity, to plunder, and to humiliation as it is this day. And now for a little while grace has been shown from the Lord our God to leave us a remnant to escape, to give us a peg in his holy place, that our God may enlighten our eyes and give us a measure of revival in our bondage. For we were slaves. Yet our God did not forsake us in our bondage, but he has extended mercy to us and the side of the kings of Persia, to revive us, to repair the house of our God, to rebuild its ruins, to give us a wall in Judah and Jerusalem. The good news is, if we fail to keep watch in any area, if you're still here this evening and you're still breathing, God is giving you time. He is giving you an opportunity. The reality is there will be points in your life, I think in everyone's life, that you will fail to keep watch. You'll say and do something without realizing. You'll fall short in teaching the full gospel of God. You'll not act the way that you should in public. You'll not keep watch on your family in a perfect way. All that God asks of us is to do our best, to try, not to make excuses, not to say that we've tried, not to say, well, I watched that bush and no lion came out of it. I did my best. And when I fell short, I prayed to God the same way that Ezra and the people did. God, give me mercy. God, forgive me. And thank you for the opportunities that you have given to make up where I have fallen short previously. I will do my best to be better in the future. If you have fallen short in that way this evening, we offer you the invitation now. Come forward and make those things right. If you're a Christian that has fallen short at keeping the watch, it has brought shame upon the name of God, don't leave here this evening. Take care of it. And he will be happy to forgive you. If you'll decide tonight, I'm going to serve him. I'm going to do better. I'm going to be vigilant. I'm going to be aware of Satan's devices, how he tempts me, where I know I'm weak, where I know I can be distracted, and not give in to that again. Strive to serve him the way that he commands. If that is the case this evening, either privately or publicly, do not leave here until you take care of that. If you are here this evening and you've not begun to keep the watch, you've let Satan run rampant. Now is the night. Now is the day. Make the decision. Serve our Lord and Savior. He will forgive you. He will equip you with everything that you have. You've spent enough time in slavery, as we just read in Ezra chapter 9. Don't continue in it. You know there's a lion out there now. You know that there is danger. You know that it will not just take your life, it will take your soul for all of eternity. Do not leave here this evening without making it right, by coming forward and being baptized. If there's any way that we can help you this evening, please take advantage of this opportunity right now, as together we stand and sing the song that has been selected.